Hello and welcome to the Whitehall Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Westminster. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And also on the podcast, Kirsty Buchanan, who was a special advisor to the Prime Minister Theresa May. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, Calum.
And Joe Tanner, political strategist. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
We are less than a week away from our big budget preview live recording, if that isn't a contradiction in terms.
So excited.
We are looking forward to this next Tuesday in central London.
Essential listening, viewing, folks.
I got stopped in the street by someone saying they were really looking forward to it. And I was like, oh my gosh,
Wow,
firstly, you knew who I was. And secondly, you're
lovely.
coming. Isn't that cool?
That is perfect.
The closest I felt to being Mick Jagger or like a rock star or something.
It's probably about as close as you want to feel to be.
Well, that's true, actually. Yeah, I haven't got the hips.
Otherwise, you'll be stopped in the street for a paternity test, more likely, yeah.
This has taken a turn.
If you would like to come along, there are literally like 2 or 3 tickets left, so you've got to be pretty snappy if you've not already got yours, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday evening. So yes, thank you if you've got your tickets. Right, on the podcast today then, the BBC, is it biased? Is it in crisis? How to solve a problem like the BBC? And also Sir Keir Starmer. And, well, I suppose, for how long will he actually be Prime Minister? And I'm only saying that half joking, because it would seem that he is facing something of, difficulty within his own cabinet. He said today that he had not authorised briefings against his cabinet. That was during Prime Minister's questions. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has denied plotting a leadership bid and has accused Number 10 insiders of, quote, self-destructive briefing against him. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, as well as Wes Streeting and Ed Miliband, are all thought to be circling and perhaps planning a leadership challenge. Sir Keir Starmer, this all began really with reporting that Sir Keir Starmer had privately said he will fight any challenge to his leadership after the budget or the elections next year for local councils in England, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd as well. Kirsty, it felt last night, as this was being reported first, that Number 10 had felt almost forced to intervene to make this promise that Sir Keir Starmer is ready to fight any challenge to his leadership from the likes of Wes Streeting, Shabana Mahmood, Ed Miliband. What did you make, first of all, of the briefing when it emerged?
What did I make of the... I made the same I had the same reaction that probably everyone else had, which was, huh?
Yes.
So, yeah, if we can just wind back in time, because obviously I've been at Number 10. I know what it's like to try and stave off potential leadership challenges. We had a few while Theresa May was there. And I was reminded of 2017. So after the Prime Minister's less than triumphant speech to conference, where that prankster decided to offset her by trying to give her a P45, and she got that terrible cough, and and all the letters came down from the back of the thing. So shortly after that, when we got back, we got wind that Grant Shapps was trying to orchestrate an immediate leadership contest. And Gavin Williamson, who was then the chief whip. Now, Gavin Williamson didn't have many talents as a departmental secretary, I think it's fair to say. But he was a pretty decent chief whip. And he moved pretty quickly to flush this out into the open. And he did 2 things, right, which I think are important to bear in mind when we talk about this kind of similar attempt, I think, to flush out into the open a suspected plot against Keir Starmer. One was he obviously briefed into the media that Shapps was going to do this, and bear in mind at the moment Shapps had no kind of immediate right of response because he was taken unawares by this. And 2, he then did a whipping operation to get various different high-level Conservative grandees to basically hit Twitter, as it probably was still then, and take the mickey out of Shapps and basically humiliate him. Wow. And so it was all kind of like, any coup organised by Shapps is not a coup I want to join, ha ha ha, all of this kind of stuff, right? And so, it fizzled out almost as quickly as an Andy Burnham challenge. So So 2 things about this. One, I don't understand if there was any sense that there was an immediate plot. Now, clearly, Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting, others within the party are kind of on manoeuvres, but only in a kind of Boris Johnson, should a ball come loose from the back of the scrum kind of way. I'm not aware, and as far as I know, nobody in Westminster is, of an immediate attempt to oust the Prime Minister. So I'm not aware about what the kind of immediate need was to brief out this nonsense 2 weeks before budget, whilst at the same time saying, oh, we can't do anything to spook the markets. And also, they did it in the knowledge, because after all, they are the ones that hold the grid, which tells you who's on broadcast round in the morning, in full knowledge that Wes Streeting was doing the morning round. So in other words, you flush out, you brief against a member of the cabinet, which is pretty nuclear in the first place. You then do that in the full knowledge that he's about to hit the broadcast studios the next morning. So he has a complete platform from which to address this all morning. And what is Wes Streeting? He's probably the best communicator that the Labour government has got. He's got warmth, he's got wit, all of which he deployed this morning. And he also made the not unreasonable point that is absolutely outrageous for aides of Number 10 to brief against a cabinet minister, and they should be sacked. So they gave him a complete platform to annihilate them this morning, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah. So then, with
and
that
he
in
made
mind,
the very
Joe,
brave choice, Callum. He made the very brave choice of linking the BBC within his answer at a time
What did
when
he
that's
say?
also been in the news. He basically said that this was effectively the most sort of outrageous attack on a faithful that you've seen since what happened in the final of the Traitors, because he regards himself very much as a faithful.
When Joe Marler got booted out, he said there's a lot of people been watching too much Celebrity Traitors.
Thanks for spoiling that for me, folks.
I did not. That was Callum. Callum
It was
blew
a week
that.
ago.
I did not. Just making it clear.
I've been busy.
Right.
What, under a rock, in a hole, not looking at any media about what happened?
I'm joking. I'm joking. Of course, I know who won.
You can have something of a political apology on that one. Joe, does this all mean then that Sir Keir, any attempt, whether orchestrated by Starmer or not, any attempt to solidify his leadership has backfired by the way that Wes Streeting came out this morning on the round, as Kirsty says, and frankly and predictably performed really quite well. What do you think about how this has been dealt with?
Well, how was it going to end well? Quite frankly, what did they think was good or useful or helpful in suggesting that the PM was under threat and was going to fight for his job? How does that headline not look rubbish, quite frankly? And second of all, of course, Wes Streeting, as a very, very effective communicator, was going to take the opportunity to say something both, probably reasonably clever, but also, of course, deny it, but has actually turned it into now a question about what's going on at Number 10, which is kind of the worst of all worlds. After the Lammy fiasco last week and the sort of, what's going on at Downing Street, that actually, was it Lammy that was the problem in PMQs last week, or was it actually the operation and who briefed him? And the fact that Number 10 didn't appear to know about what had gone on with this, the prisoners that were out. And then you've got a question now about the people around the PM and what they're doing, how they're behaving, and if they're briefing against cabinet members. So the whole thing, to me, looks. I don't know how it was going to end well anyway. I don't know why you'd have done it. I don't know in what way that would have strengthened the PM's position in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. What also should we read into wider considerations about the Labour Party and Labour MPs? I mean, we know that this government is unpopular. That reality is obvious in poll after poll after poll. Kirsty?
Well, I think there's two things. One, obviously, that he is unpopular, and much like Boris Johnson, we were repeatedly told, had a relatively transactional relationship with his own party. And the minute he stopped looking like a winner, then, the herd turned, as it were. I think Starmer is the same. I think we've been hearing in the last couple of weeks about how Starmer has been on a charm offensive to try and woo some of those backbenchers that he's basically ignored for the last sort of 15 months. Quite, just as an aside, quite how that helped with whoever did that brilliant briefing last night, also referring to the Labour backbenchers as feral and thick. I'm not entirely sure that's done much for his charm offensive either. So it's not just about popularity, it's about weakness. He went into that, as a weak prime minister who isn't in control of his own parliamentary party. We also learnt this week that, on top of breaking your manifesto pledge and almost certainly raising income tax on all of us, they're also going to spend yet more money on benefits as a sop to their own backbenchers by lifting the cap on the two-child cap on welfare benefits, which is not very popular with the public. Obviously, 2/3 of people think that's the wrong thing to do. But it's a sop to the backbench. So you now have got a number 10 that entirely looks like it's being run by the Parliamentary Labour Party. It looked weak. It then decides inexplicably to pick a fight that it didn't need to pick with one of its most popular and effective cabinet ministers, who then promptly makes mincemeat out of them. I'm not sure how it was possible for them to look more chaotic and more weak than they already did. And trust me, I'm not, God knows I know what it looks like to be in a number 10 that looks weak and ineffective. I speak of as I know. This isn't entirely schadenfreude, although, thank God the Gariups are in charge. But actually, you've ended up making yourself look, more chaotic and more weak. And in a kind of crowded field of bad weeks, this has got to really rank up there for Starmer.
Yeah.
And as someone who worked with Boris, who was always plotting, apparently, and sometimes I think was deliberately plotting, but other times was just a very effective communicator and attracted attention. Wes kind of does that naturally. He gets attention. He gets more attention for things he does, which therefore is a threat to the PM, because the PM doesn't have the same cut through. So even if you're just, quite frankly, being quite loyal but being very effective at your job, you're a problem because you're outshining the PM, because he's not. And therefore that is always going to be a problem, whether you're actively, doing something or not. So I think Kirsty's right. It's I don't know how they could have ended up in a worse position, really.
Yeah. It is quite staggering. My other question actually on this then is to think about the budget in a couple of weeks and actually to consider whether this government can get through the budget, which is essentially a vote of confidence. Are the backbenchers going to rally round what was already going to be a pretty unpopular budget if it smells like there might be the opportunity to undermine the Prime Minister to replace him with somebody that they may prefer in the shape of Streeting, etc.? Kirsty.
Well, here's an interesting point. So the received wisdom at Westminster has been for months and months and months that should a leadership challenge come, it will come after the May elections next year, which was obviously expected to see Labour perform pretty badly in both Wales and Scotland and across a slew of unitary councils in England. I've never entirely bought that, because I've lived a very long time on this planet, and if I had £1 for every time I heard that local elections would be the flashpoint for a leadership challenge, then I would be sunning myself in Barbados right now, and not sitting here trying to earn an honest crust. So I've never entirely bought that, but I think what's happened as it's become clearer and clearer that Rachel Reeves is indeed beginning to think the unthinkable and then move to an almost certain place of income tax rises and a major breach of probably the central manifesto pledge. I think that it became more of a question not only of not if but when, but actually whether it became more realistic to do it this side of the local elections. The argument against that, of course, is that nobody that has serious designs to leadership are going to want to own the May elections either, because it's not like you replace Starmer and Labour's election victories go whoop whoop and everything's fine again. So my guess is that they don't want the ball to become loose from the back of the net, back of the scrum before May in any event, because they want Starmer to own that disaster. Having said that, these things can take on a life of their own. There is a world where, if you've got a significant enough of number of backbenchers combined with the opposition, that you could try and vote down your own government's budget. Now, again, that would be an extremely nuclear option, and I'm not for a minute thinking that that is probably realistic at this moment in time. But, there are there are mechanisms to prompt a leadership challenge, and that would be one of them. The simpler one, at a time of your own choosing, is to get 80 Labour MPs together, get a stalking horse, and off you go, which probably still seems the most likely for me post-May. But the idea that it might happen before Christmas is now no longer just an absurdity.
Yeah. I think my other thought, Joe, actually is to put to you on staffing at number 10. And it's not the first time, it won't be the last time, I'm sure we talk about the kind of internal personnel. Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, is someone who keeps coming up in conversation. He is credited with getting Keir Starmer to the top of the Labour Party. He is credited with getting Keir Starmer over the line to become Prime Minister. And I think when we speak of him in kind of political nerdery circles, people are aware of him. He has good name recognition. But I'm not sure if that's a good thing for a Chief of Staff. The other suggestion is whether he maintained his backing for Sir Keir Starmer in all of this, or whether he is so power hungry he either, rallies the troops against Starmer, or senses that the troops are rallying themselves against the Prime Minister, and so McSweeney himself abandons Project Starmer. I'm trying to work out his position in all of this, whether he is doing some characteristic string pulling, perhaps.
I mean, it's hard to know. I just don't think anyone involved with Project Starmer's enjoying Project Starmer. I think they'd all like to just throw in the towel.
No,
to
not
some
even
extent.
Starmer.
That's my point. With these things, you normally want to do this because you're fighting for a cause and you're fighting for something you believe in, and you're going to achieve. Yeah. And you also, quite frankly, you go into government because of all the changes you want to bring. And they've got there and there's no money. All the stuff that you wanted to do, all the visionary stuff that you thought of for the election is just like a sort of locked box in a corner that you can't get anywhere near because there's umpteen grenades in the way. And I think the challenge now is, is this Morgan McSweeney? Morgan McSweeney's getting the finger pointed at him, but you've also got Tim Allen now in the centre of government in terms of communications. Is this just someone else who is speaking from the shadows? Like, we still don't really know. Morgan is the most visible person that's getting pointed at. But to go back to Kirsty's point, we're approaching Christmas, folks. I don't know about you, but I always have that moment where roughly somewhere between the 27th of December and about the 4th of January, everyone updates their LinkedIn. You go home, you spend time with your family, and you go, I hate my job. What am I doing with my life? Why am I doing all of this? And I honestly think we're going to look back, and Rachel Reeves's speech that she made, I think, will be the start of the serious decline of Starmer and the really central team, because they've pretty much they're sending all the Labour MPs off saying it is palatable for us to break an election pledge. And that is something that isn't just about them two or those three or Morgan McSweeney or others. It's everybody under the Labour banner. It's quite frankly, it's something that will be lobbed at every local candidate in the elections in May. It is such a big deal that even if they don't do it now, the fact that they let it be known they would be prepared to is so dangerous in terms of we're already at such a low point about trust in public life and in trust in politicians, that the fact that they even let that go out there as a message and let it run the way that they did, that even if, quite frankly, they thought it was a clever double bluff, and by the time we get to the budget, it's business that gets really clobbered and they find some other routes to do things. The fact that they allowed it to be out there, it is as if it's already happened. We're talking about it as if it happened. And I honestly think that if you were Keir Starmer sitting down for your Christmas dinner and that miserable period afterwards where you feel like you've eaten too much and, you didn't get the present you wanted and you realise that Wes didn't send you a happy Christmas message or whatever, and you probably get a few, next year I'm coming for you messages from other people, God knows what. But I think you will start to wonder if you've really got the stomach to get on with next year, because I think it's looking really grim. And I just, I do think there will be people wondering what they're doing with their lives in the jobs that they're currently in. I don't think Starmer really wants to do it. I don't think he particularly is enjoying it. I don't think it's what he thought it was going to be. And where's the upside for any of them? They're just going to keep losing stuff. They're just going to get bounced around by reform. And there's no money to do anything they really want to do. So where's the upside? Yeah, you're governing, but You've got a bunch of people around you. You've got a majority, but in number, but not really in spirit.
Well, it's the classic in office, but not in power anymore,
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely.
I think now would be the time for me to revive a point I think I'd made before. One of those dangerous predictions that if they come right, that we can replay, and if it doesn't come right, we'll pretend I never said it. I have long thought that Morgan McSweeney won't last out the year in number 10. The tensions of Keir Starmer trying to appease the soft left in the party, which is against every part of the political strategy that Morgan McSweeney is trying to implement in number 10, means that I think at some point that will fly apart. And that feels far more likely to me that he will walk before Christmas now than it has ever felt. Not that I'm saying he's responsible for these briefings. I don't think that is. I don't know who's responsible for these briefings. They should be taken outside and slapped round the head. Whoever thought it was a good idea. I don't know who it was, but I do think it's considerably less likely that he will go the distance now. And much as a prime minister that loses his chancellor has relatively numbered days at number 10, a prime minister that loses not one but two chiefs of staff in less than 2 years also can consider that he's pretty much dead man walking.
Well, there you are. It's
God,
staggering.
it's so depressing.
It's
I mean, it really
It's
is.
beginning to feel a lot like Christmas.
Yeah, but
I was about to
honestly,
say
it's not Christmas.
unprecedented, but then remembered Liz Truss did,
But
less
it's
than
not
50
Christmas
days.
for anyone. Like, this is, I can't tell you how frustrated I am and how I sat the other day. I don't know about you two, but when the Lisa Nandy story and the football regulator thing came out, it was just after the Lammy
appointing
stuff.
somebody
that
who
had
had
given
donated
money
to her leadership campaign.
I have to say it was now I've talked before about the fact that I voted for Labour in 97 and then I went to work for the Tories in 99, and I was actually very loyal compared to some of the people that were supposedly Tories that worked there. But I voted in 97 in my first election I could vote in. I voted for Labour because I was sick of the corrupt Tory government and all the nonsense that was going on and all the stories that kept coming out. And last week, after that Lammy performance at PMQs, and I voted for this lot. I've talked about the fact that I voted for them. My local candidate was a guy that I went to school with and he won. But I cannot tell you, I watched the reporting of the Lisa Nandy football reg, and I sat there and I thought, this is like that moment in 97 where you want that lot out. And I was like, this has happened really bloody quick, folks. Really, it is, I don't buy into this whole like calamity and all that, but it sort of is. I mean, it is just like, how many times can you just boot yourself in the head? Like they are literally hitting themselves repeatedly with these really ridiculous cock-ups and mistakes and briefings. And, it's so bad. I feel really disheartened because, it's our bloody economy that's going to suffer. It's jobs that's going to go. This lot need to get it right.
Well, look, and there's two things there. One, I think it's fair to say, slightly in Labour's defence, that governing is hard. Your ability to pull levers and actually get things done is considerably less than people would think, because in between managing your own party, the decisions of the court, popular opinion, what is politically sellable, etc. Things are, your stakeholders and their concerns, things are considerably less kind of room for manoeuvre than you would think, even with a thwacking great majority. And sometimes because you've got a thwacking great majority and you've got no way of keeping people in line by suggesting that they might get onto the ministerial ladder at some point if they just behave themselves. So some of it is that. But I think one of the reasons that this government has unravelled so quickly is the sheer scale of unforced errors by themselves.
Agreed.
Bad communication, bad policy decisions that they didn't need to take. And if you look at just the last 2 weeks, it's like a clown show. We had yet another chap walk out of prison. Lammy came to finally got dragged back to Parliament this week to reveal what he should have revealed last week, and threw in for extra measure that there may or may not be another accidental release. He's not quite sure yet. can't find him. He's probably walked out. He'll update the House when he has more. And at the same time as that was happening, we also hear that yet another migrant who was deported under our one in, one out scheme has got straight back on a boat and come back again. So, look, I get it's hard. I get it's difficult. But when you start to get a narrative where every day is like a whack-a-mole of crazy or chaos or calamity, and you were there for three things. One, not to give people more of the same chaos, infighting, navel-gazing, ferrets in a sack lunacy that we've seen, over the last 24 hours. To give people kind of stability and proper grown-up government. We haven't had that. To give people competence and to put the economy back on the right footing. None of these things are happening. And that is before we hit, and I said it before and I'll say it again, if you break that manifesto commitment and you raise income tax, it doesn't matter what other wheeze you do, whether you lift national insurance, but raise income tax, it is electoral suicide. It is such a breach of trust that it is utterly unforgivable for the public. Already, I think there's been a poll, something like 66% of people, 2/3 of people think she should resign if she does that. And that's before it impacts. So, look, so much of this has unraveled so quickly because so much of it didn't need to happen.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, there you are. Your thoughts are very welcome, of course. Will Sir Keir Starmer still be the Prime Minister by Christmas? Or May elections? Or, I don't know, your analysis on this would be very welcome. You can email us hello@whitehallsources.com to get in touch. Or, of course, you can pop us a WhatsApp as well. And the number there is 0333... I've forgotten the number. 0333 404 6507. I was about to give you the one to Message Times Radio. That's not the one you need at all.
I wondered if that's where we were heading. Were you going to give out my mobile or something?
I was just going to... You can contact Joe on...
Yeah, Joe's number 07. No, never mind. 0333 404 6507 and start your message with the word Whitehall. Right, shall we go on to what had been the dominating story of the week until number 10 weighed in and, proved that
Said, hold my beer. Yeah.
Yeah, literally. Hold my lockdown beer.
You think that's a coup? Hold my beer. This is a coup. Yeah.
So President Trump says he has an obligation to sue the BBC over its editing of a speech he made in one of its Panorama programmes. Trump's comments aired after editors of the Panorama programme said they were unaware of the way his speech had been, quote, doctored when they signed off. The edit was exposed by David Grossman, a BBC editorial advisor, who flagged it to the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee in January as part of a 45-page comprehensive report on the BBC's coverage of the of the US election. Samir Shah, the BBC chairman, was forced to apologise for the mistake in a letter to government ministers on Monday after the resignation of Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, and Deborah Turnus, the Chief Executive of News. I think that is approximately where we're up to on this story. We should note as well, Kirsty, the involvement of Michael Prescott, who wrote a memo to the BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Board, where he spoke of the Trump programme, he spoke of coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, he spoke of the BBC's transgender coverage, he spoke also of immigration issues and the use of historians, and also he considered racism. I mean, these are the key points from the memo that he sent through. This was all published in the Daily Telegraph, and I think it is fair to say the war on the BBC has ramped up since then, and interested friends and allies of the BBC have also been considering basically how it has gone wrong, if indeed they think it has, which is up for discussion as well. Shall we start with the Prescott memo, Kirsty?
Okay, right. Shall I start with the obligatory caveat that I think everybody needs to start with before they start discussing this apparently explosive issue? Like anybody that's worried about information flows in a democracy, a functioning democracy, of course I support the BBC. Of course I believe in the importance of it as an institution. I think we need it now more than ever in an age of growing misinformation. I have a good number of friends who are journalists at the BBC who I hold in high regard, both professionally and personally. And I include among that number Robbie Gibb, who no doubt I'm sure will come to talk about in relation to this story. There is an insane amount of noise around this story and has been for days. So let me just try and focus back on the core point of this. So Michael Prescott, about 3 years ago, he's a former political editor of the Sunday Times. He has no political affiliation, and he was very well respected as a political editor. He was appointed to give editorial advice 3 years ago to a committee within the BBC, an internal committee called the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. The job of that committee is to review and monitor BBC output right across the piece, to make sure that it is living up to those high standards that you'd expect of a public service broadcaster that's funded by a licence fee, of those core values of accuracy, impartiality, diversity of opinion. You know, that is what gives it, the BBC, its unique place in the media landscape. And so it monitors huge swathes of output, not just contested stuff, but a huge swathe of stuff. So, and that research is carried out by David Grossman. David Grossman is a BBC journalist, again, enormously highly respected within the organisation. And these were internal reviews commissioned internally by the BBC, researched by David Grossman, and then discussed by the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. Michael Prescott, after 3 years of sitting on this committee, when his term ended, he had become quite dismayed by the fact that when Grossman's brilliantly forensic research showing in some sections, not all the time, but sometimes significant issues, either accuracy or bias, things leaning in a particular direction, if you like, that nothing was done about it. That the kind of default position of the BBC management when faced with this evidence was to dismiss it, to deflect it, or to downplay it, right? And that is what we saw in classic example of this Trump-doctored documentary. That was highlighted. Here's the irony. The only reason that anybody ever really found out about it is David Grossman was a US journalist. And so when he was reviewing the whole of the coverage, he knew that there was something wrong with that because he had been there for that speech and he knew that that wasn't what Trump had said. Sliding doors moment number one. So when the report came to the ESCG, and when they responded to it, Jonathan Munro, who is now the acting CEO of news at BBC, said it is normal practice to take clips and shorten it together. Now, anybody who is a journalist will tell you that not only is that not normal practice, it's worse than shoddy journalism. It's an absolute disgrace to take. It doesn't matter what you think about Donald Trump or what you think about Donald Trump's actions on that day, to take two bits of a speech that are almost an hour apart, splice them together without any kind of indication to the viewer that that is what you have done, and completely change the meaning of what he has said, is beyond misinformation, right?
So that's the crucial part, is it changes entirely the context. Because I think that sometimes you might be looking for 15 seconds of a speech that you want to put in your television report or whatever, but the amount of stress that can cause in order that you tick the box of getting a point across without changing the context can be huge. So it has to be done right.
Yeah.
Editing is a skill.
Exactly. I'm a journalist, you're a journalist, Calum. I would never... I would never, ever. You can put ellipses in, you can put a time lapse, but what you can't do is fundamentally change the sense of what someone is saying. And that is what was done. And when faced with that, Jonathan Munro said, this is normal practice, right? And it's not the only example. I've actually read that leaked Prescott memo. It's full of examples of management facing evidence of inaccuracies and bias in certain areas that are just dismissed and downplayed. And as if to prove Prescott's point ably, when that document is leaked, and hats off to the Telegraph for doing a great job on covering this story and leading on this story, what is the first thing that happens? We hear the management of the BBC dismiss, deflect and deny. Outgoing Tim Davie, outgoing Deborah Turness say, nothing to see here. Our journalists are all great, which by and large, a lot of them are incredible journalists. But the idea that there is nothing to see here is exactly what Prescott was worried about and complaining about when he sent that memo to the board, which is the wider board of the BBC, to say, look, we've got a problem. And when it's flagged, the default position is just to dismiss it or to deflect from it. And that's exactly what's happened. Now this has come to light.
Yeah.
And what's
Thank
slightly
you.
worrying is who has taken over from Deborah Turness,
Jonathan Munro.
who thinks it's okay to splice and dice with content. Like, that's actually pretty worrying, that the solution on a temporary basis is him. Like, I find that bizarre.
I would add to this, as somebody who worked at the BBC for only 5 years, but I was there, and I was a news producer on BBC Radio 5 Live for the majority of my time. A couple of thoughts. One is that when you are there as a relatively junior member of staff whose role each day is to make radio news programmes, when stuff like this is going on, it drives you mad, because you look at the misstep after misstep after misstep of the executives who are on fat salaries, even fatter pensions, with an even fatter sense of their own self-importance, making mistake after mistake after mistake, while you are sitting there in your team of 6 to 10 people, including a very experienced editor, stewing over what is right and wrong to put on the air, to not put on the air, to edit, to not edit, whatever. These are the sorts of decisions that journalists have to make every single day, often when they're really up against it, on deadlines, etc., to get stuff on the air. So I just want to say that there will be thousands of journalists sitting in BBC newsrooms absolutely apoplectic at the way that management is dealing with this. And often, I know it can feel too easy to blame management, but part of the other problem the BBC has is that these people who end up in these six-figure roles get promoted out of the kind of front line, as it were, of making news programmes. They lose all sight of what it takes to make a news programme. They have to try to justify their own existence by going to meetings and sending emails. And you often end up in a situation where experience is forgotten or is diminished or is lost, and they lose sight of their editorial responsibility. And that is a real issue too. I don't think the BBC has institutional bias in the way that we might think of it. I think there's a problem in that experience has been allowed to walk out the door in the last few years when it comes to editorial decision making. And I think that means that you don't anymore have as many, and I'm going to say, strong personalities who are editors of programmes who are quite happy to stand up against any perceived direction of travel or groupthink on their own team and say, hang on, that is not appropriate, that's not how we do things here. And instead, to fill the gaps behind these experienced people who've all naffed off because they've been made redundant, instead to fill the gaps, you have to promote inexperienced people who are not ready to do those jobs. And that is how groupthink seeps in. I could tell you also, BBC teams are such islands. Any sort of feeling that there's a directive from on high that everybody just, jumps to is slightly odd. But I understand that these things can then creep through newsrooms because teams work with teams and people move around teams and all of that. So that's how these things kind of seep in. But I would highlight the experience that has departed the corporation in the last number of years as being at least partly responsible for this too.
See, I would say as a pundit who appears on programmes, and I've done plenty of BBC stuff over the years and dealt with the BBC at various times in roles where I've been having to represent a client or look after a politician. I would say there is a problem. We're talking about the BBC as a whole. We're not talking about BBC News, which is actually where a lot of this has come from. There's plenty of other bits of the BBC that have functioned incredibly well, but I've had to go toe-to-toe with journalists and production teams over editorial guidelines that are published on the BBC's website, and I've had to explain when I haven't been given right or reasonable time to reply to accusations that have been made to an organisation. Maybe that I've had to quote back. I've had to go onto an email and I've had to quote parts of their own editorial guidance to them to say why something they're doing is wrong. And I've used that effectively to support work that I've done because there is a process that is supposed to be followed. And on the whole, it is followed. When you point it out, there is then potentially a climb down or a change or whatever. But as a guest, as a pundit, I've always been incredibly impressed by the professionalism, the briefing, the guidance that I get about what we should and shouldn't be talking about, how you can't potentially stray into an area that might be difficult because it's there's a legal element to it, or this is still an alleged issue. I've always been very impressed by the teams that I've dealt with. But as you've said, this does feel like this is a serious question about something that's higher up in the organisation. And Prescott's words themselves are pretty, he almost sort of makes out he's right in this as his kind of not quite last will and testament, but there is a sort of, as I'm going, I'm sending this because I'm leaving so frustrated with so many different things that I'm having to sort of tell you now in written form because I know this will live on in some way. And quite frankly, good on him. I'm glad he did it because I think it's really important when we have to remember these governance roles are, and often you think, someone got paid money to be an advisor or whatever. But actually, this is what they're supposed to do. They are supposed to be an oversight to groupthink and things that go wrong in organisations. And he's effectively been a whistleblower here. And I think he's done a good job. I think it's the right thing to have done.
Just a couple of thoughts to bring us to a conclusion on the BBC discussion. Kirsty, I have to ask you whether you think this is a Robbie Gibb orchestrated coup to somehow torch the BBC from the inside.
Back to the point about when faced with criticism, friends and allies of the BBC seek to deflect. So a lot of the noise that we've heard around this story is that this is a right-wing plot by Robbie Gibb, who was the former Director of Communications for Number 10 under Theresa May. What you hear less of is the fact that Robbie spent the vast majority of his career working in the BBC. He knows the organisation very well and understands the culture of it, which is one of the reasons, for a start, it was put on the board. And Robbie, in between working at Number 10 and being appointed to the board, where obviously now he's not in a position to talk publicly and defend himself against some fairly hysterical accusations, you can look at what he said on panels, you can look at what he's written in the past, as statements of fact. He is a staunch defender of the BBC. He's always been a staunch defender of the vital importance of the BBC and its role of impartiality in a polarised media landscape. He's a staunch defender of the licence fee. I've had many a conversation with Robbie where he's done his old shtick about, for the price of a cup of coffee, you get X channels and, World Service and local radio and, all of that. So I think a couple of things about this, and he's also a great supporter of Tim Davies, by the way, as well. So I think a couple of things. One, if this were a right-wing coup, to what end? Because I don't know anybody serious in kind of centre-right politics, including Robbie Gibb, that believes in defunding the BBC. They think it should be funded. Secondly, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has already said in terms what she's minded to do in terms of the next funding model as the charter renewal comes up, which is to move to a kind of mixed funding model. So you have a kind of a core universal fee, and then you have a subscription model on top of it. So you're not fighting for the kind of outcome of the charter. And I'd like to think that Robbie would be smart enough that if he was going to stage a right-wing coup from the inside, he probably would have done it when you had a Conservative government still. I mean, he's been a member of the board for quite a few years now. I'd like to think if there was going to be a coup, probably one of the key elements of it would be having a Conservative government in office. So look, I'm not sure any of this... it all makes good froth for enemies of the centre-right, but I'm not sure any of it's anything more than a pile of old baloney. But I think there is a more serious issue underneath that, and it's the point that kind of, the silent bit that Ed Davies said out loud. What are we saying here about an organisation that is in part supposed to reflect diversity of opinion? What are we saying about people that are prepared to challenge when they see perceptions of bias within the organisation? When we say that it's okay to do these things as long as you're not a Conservative. The BBC has a long track record of political appointments to the BBC. Now, you can argue about whether that's the right thing to do or not, but I don't remember Ed Davey getting the smelling salts out when former Labour Culture Secretary James Pennell was appointed to Director of Radio of the BBC, under a Conservative government, I might add. So are we saying that, no Conservative has the right to be appointed to the board, but if you're a Labour Party member or, a Liberal Democrat, that's just fine and dandy. And it's precisely this kind of view, this refusal to accept a worldview other than the kind of progressive left, that's probably got the BBC into some of the pickle that it's in now. And it's not just a criticism from the centre right. Women who have had to put up with endless stories about how wonderful kind of transitioning and trans ideology is from this kind of, as you were saying, Calum, this kind of groupthink of no one is in a room is saying, well, hold on a minute, this isn't necessarily a good thing. It's a part of that. On Israel and Gaza, which is obviously a hotly contested issue, you'll find just as many people on the hard left that think that the BBC is pro-Israel bias as you'll find on the right thinking that it's got anti-Israel bias. So the criticisms of impartiality come from all round. But I think the one central thing I would just like to finish with, is it possible for the BBC to be impartial? Yes, of course it is, as long as it continues to have those systems in place of rigorous monitoring and allow them to do their job without encouraging the sort of pile-on we've seen around this. And how do I know this? Well, we spend half our time on this podcast saying how much we heart Chris Mason, who is the political editor of the BBC. Yeah. If you put a gun to my head, I could not tell you what Chris Mason's politics is. And he is on TV and radio all day, every day, sometimes when he is so tired he can hardly keep his eyes open, and not once have I ever heard him display any kind of bias or any kind of partiality of view at all. He's there to report in a very brilliant, very analytical, very witty way what is going on. But do I ever hear his opinion seep into it? No, I do not. And there are hundreds of brilliant journalists like that in the BBC, hundreds of them. And when the practices, let those hundreds of brilliant journalists down, they feel that as acutely as anybody does. And the idea that this is all because of it's some ridiculous right-wing coup is an offence to the hard-working journalists of the BBC as much as it is to anybody else that's criticising it from the outside.
And can I just say, Robbie's pretty good, but I don't think he's that good.
What,
do you know what I mean?
Down the whole organisation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but the idea that, one person's managed... The fact is, Prescott's memo makes it very bloody clear, as does the tape, that things have been going wrong. So the idea that this is all, dreamt up then as some sort of great opportunity, I don't particularly buy it.
I also think, as somebody who used to produce radio programmes, that you would also try to get on the BBC News website and perhaps even on a BBC television programme. Trying to make that happen was like trying to negotiate world peace. It was a complete flipping nightmare. Anyone who leads any sort of concerted effort within the BBC deserves some sort of praise. Because I've never been aware of it happening up till now.
I would
honestly.
say we should also spare a thought for one Lisa Hunter, who took over as, I think, Director of Communications for the BBC about 2 days before this happened, and is probably needing some sleep out there.
Hi, Liz.
I mean, she really is. She's probably, that woman going into that job. That's the job you go, yay, I'm now in charge of comms at the BBC.
Look,
and then
Lisa used to work for Ian Duncan Smith at the DWP. She's made of sturdy stock. Don't worry about it.
She is, but seriously, I mean, what a first week in a job.
Yeah, well done. Good luck and best wishes is all I have to say on that. Right, Joe and Kirsty, thank you both very much. Two big issues dominating the week. They might even be dominating this time next week as well, such as the size of them and scale of them. Whatever it is, we'll be here next week to take you inside politics at Westminster on the Whitehall Sources podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Press subscribe wherever you've just enjoyed this podcast, and we will drop into your feed again next week.